It's good to be back in my alma mater. It seems like some things have changed since I graduated in 2003. Before I begin, I want to share a brief experience I had this past summer. My family and I visited friends up in Canada at their cottage, and on the last day of our trip, we had a freak motorboat accident, and I shattered my femur. It was an extremely painful situation. I ended up in the hospital for a few days, and one of the ways the doctors helped me cope with the pain before the surgery, after the surgery, was by prescribing various opiates, including morphine, fentanyl, and Percocets. A few weeks later, when I started tapering off the medication, I began experiencing severe symptoms of withdrawal. It had only been 3 weeks on the medication, and I hadn't even stopped cold turkey. And yet, I was sweating profusely throughout the day, feeling super cold, then feverishly hot, and unable to sleep for more than an hour at a time. I had no appetite. No one had warned me that this was going to happen to me. In fact, the surgeon in the hospital had told me when I was reluctant to take the medication, he said, "You experience a severe trauma. People like you don't get addicted." And I wanted to tell him, it's people like you who filled up my practice. No joke. Working in the addiction field for the last 10 years has made me familiar with the signs and symptoms of withdrawal. Knowing this made it easier to get through the difficult days and successfully taper off medication. The experience would have been significantly harder if I had no idea what was happening to me. That appreciation is fundamental to getting through a situation like this. This awareness is also the key factor in addressing the addiction problem around us. It's incredible that you are all here tonight demonstrating that you're aware of the epidemic around us. This is significant. This is a significant shift from 5 years ago when I sat talking to a prominent Rav of a large modern Orthodox shul, and he told me that in his 20 years at the pulpit, he had dealt with only one case of addiction. We've come a long way in acknowledging the issue since then. Tonight I want to answer 4 questions. What is addiction? Where does it come from? How to prevent it? And what to do if someone is struggling with it. I don't find it necessary to convince you that there is an issue. You've all seen the media reports. You're all here tonight and appreciate that it's an issue in our community as well. I've worked with clients from every walk of the Jewish life. And it's not just an issue that affects adolescents or young adults. My youngest client I worked with was addicted to cocaine at age 14 and went to rehab. And my oldest client was a 75-year-old Holocaust survivor. Although I'll be focusing primarily on substance addiction, more than half the cases I work with aren't addicted to drugs or alcohol. Rather, they're addicted to other behaviors such as internet, porn, sex, relationships, food, gambling, money spending, and shopping. It's important to recognize that these addictions have been proven to hijack the brain in the same way as substances do, and their consequences can be just as devastating. Addiction is not a bad habit or some sort of weakness. It's a medical condition, like Rabbi Rothwachs described. It has recognizable symptomology, no matter what the substance or behavior is. In the past, people believed it stemmed from some sort of moral failing, and suggested that if you were strong-willed, you could just stop. However, some of the most dedicated and upstanding people I know are individuals who've struggled with addiction. Dr. Bradley Lewis, an addiction psychiatrist based out of NYU, who I've collaborated throughout the years with, once told me, he said, "I'd rather complete 4 years of medical school again than have to get sober from an addiction." On a neurological level, the brain's pleasure system gets hijacked and altered to expect and rely on an ever-increasing stimulation that using or the behavior provides. In order to properly prevent addiction, it's important to appreciate where it comes from. This awareness can help us navigate challenges before they arise. Our children, teens, and young adults will inevitably be exposed to the pressures of addictive substances or behaviors. In fact, many of them may even experiment. Recent research has suggested that 1 in 3 children drink alcohol or have drank alcohol, and 1 in 5 have gotten drunk in the past. Close to that amount of 16-year-olds have reported smoking marijuana in the last 30 days. So why do only a few of them, a percentage of them, become addicted? Rabbi Rothwachs talked about some of the reasons. They include genetics, right? There's a clear genetic disposition. Mental illness significantly plays an impact and a role in the development of addiction, including various forms of anxiety or depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD, bipolar disorder. Cultural and familial exposure have powerful impacts. If you come home and you see your dad having a drink every night to deal with the stress, why wouldn't you? If the adults are all smoking marijuana on a vacation at night, why wouldn't the kids want to try it too? And don't think for a second that they won't see it. Trauma is also a common determining factor. Emotional, physical, and sexual abuse play a role in forming addiction in many cases. Most of the individuals I've worked with have experienced some form of trauma in the past. I was first an addiction therapist. I was trained as an addiction therapist. And as I began working with more and more clients, I realized that if I really wanted to help the clients I worked with, I had to get trained in treating trauma. And this doesn't just refer to severe incidents of trauma, but can also include prolonged feelings of abandonment or neglect that may seem much less severe. The Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step program, which has seen 8 decades of success, has described addiction as stemming from a spiritual deficit. Many of the young adults, and even married clients of mine, cite this as their struggle. They have religious conflicts and feel that they have no avenue to process these issues because they need to fall in line within the communities they live in. I was once facilitating a young adults process group, and there was an 18-year-old formerly religious kid in the group, and he was struggling to put together just a couple of months sober. And one night in group, he gets up and he angrily starts cursing. And he says, I hate the fact that the only way I'm going to get sober is by coming to these groups, needing to talk about my feelings. And I hate that I have to go to meetings and hang out with other addicts. And most of all, I hate knowing that the only way I'll get sober is with God. He has done so much to hurt me in the past. And yet, He's the only way I'm going to stay clean. Today, or this past January, this client celebrated 6 years sober. Through dedicated work in AA and group therapy and our individual work, he's resolved many of his qualms. Adults that become addicted have many of the same predispositions. And again, adults become addicted just like teens and young adults. Some cases can stem from pain management, post an injury or surgery. Others become addicted because of work and financial stressors, which are particularly extreme in our community. In addition, the availability of substances leads to innocent experimenting even in adulthood. Many people I know took their first Percocet or Adderall or Xanax because a friend or a colleague at work, someone in shul or someone on vacation told them it would help them. Understanding these variables is important because they're the warning signs. The more quickly and thoroughly we address the issues I've discussed, the more likely we are to fend off an addiction down the road. This means properly addressing the emotional impact of a learning disability, creating a safe space to talk about a traumatic event, whether it's big or small, and having open conversations about addiction and mental illness in the extended family instead of hiding it. For adults, it means seeking support when there are financial or marital stressors, counseling after a surgery, and education and awareness about the risks of innocent use. A few years ago, I wrote an article about how important it is to teach our children to express themselves and be vulnerable. I've even suggested that this is the linchpin of addiction. Individuals who feel safe expressing themselves are less likely to turn to addictive behaviors. A client of mine who lost his father at 13 was sitting in my office 10 years later at 23 years old, and he told me how he was bullied in 2nd grade. And he told me he came home and he told his parents he was bullied, and his mom got all emotional and created this big scene, and his dad just got frustrated and told him to toughen up and fight back. And so I said to him, did you ever tell your parents about being bullied again? And he said he had never spoken to parents about being bullied, and never spoke about his feelings to them or anyone else until this day when he had come into therapy. It is vital that we model and enable our children to become emotionally expressive and feel safe being vulnerable. This will lead to more well-adjusted adults and is especially important in developing supportive and healthy marriages. Relationships and marriage where addiction is ripe for growth are those that lack safety for one or both individuals to express themselves. I once worked with a 30-year-old Hasidish guy whose wife was struggling with an addiction. And I was collaborating with her therapist, and we discovered that each of them, the husband and the wife, harbored a desire to send their kids to a more modern school, modern yeshiva, but were fearful of sharing this with their spouse out of concern of being judged. Imagine living like that for 10 years, where nothing of substance can be discussed. One of the proudest moments I had as a father was a couple years ago when my son was 5 and my wife was pregnant, and my son kept saying that he wanted to have a baby sister. And we couldn't understand. We just thought, he'd probably want a baby brother. Like, he's a boy, he'd want a baby brother. And we kept asking, why baby sister? And he wouldn't tell us. And finally, one Shabbos, he came up to us and he said, I want a baby sister because if I had a brother, I'd be jealous of him. And I was so proud that he was able to, understand what he was feeling and articulate that to us. In terms of prevention, specifically for teenagers, I want to outline a couple of practical tools. Nothing novel, nothing you haven't heard before. However, it's always helpful to be reminded of what we can do. Let me begin with this story. 20 years ago, Iceland had the highest rate of teenage drug and alcohol and cigarette use. Now, you may wonder, Iceland, it's really far off. They're probably culturally very different than we are. But I think there's an important lesson to learn from what they did. They addressed their problem, and amazingly were able to knock down their rates from 40% using to 5% using in 20 years. Now they have the lowest rates in all of Europe. And they lowered the funding for treatment and prevention at the same time. And they did so with a couple of simple changes. They organized activities for teenagers 3 to 4 nights a week across the country. They funded gyms, clubhouses, and sports leagues for everybody. And they offered, number 2, they offered money to parents to spend more time with their children. Parents were encouraged to attend talks about the importance of spending quantities of time, not just qualities of time, to talk to their kids about their lives, to understand who their friends were, and to keep them at home in the evenings. Now, I know this is a tall order, especially in our extremely busy lives. I get home late, around 10 o'clock, most nights of the week, and my wife works a full-time job. But whatever we could do to put together some time to spend more time with them can really make all the difference. We should spend time having conversations with our children about the various dangers that they're going to encounter in the world around them in an age-appropriate manner. We should avoid lecturing them. Instead, we should try exploring their beliefs from their perspective. Look at the pros and cons from their view. I would suggest not just talking about drugs and alcohol. The median age for first exposure to pornography in this country is 10 years old. Porn is like crack cocaine for the developing brain, something we should be talking about to our kids. This past Thursday, I met with a couple and their 19-year-old son. He's been smoking marijuana for the last 3 years, daily, and they brought him in because they wanted some help to figure out what to do. And his smoking has caused various consequences for him, for them. He's enrolled in college for the last 3 semesters only to drop the classes after a few weeks. He sits at home, he doesn't work, he doesn't have much social interaction, and his mom sat in my office and said, I just want him to have a girlfriend. And he emphatically declared, he said, I don't have any problems. The only issue is that my parents make a problem out of everything I do. And they agreed that besides marijuana, they haven't talked about anything of substance in the last 3 years. I explained that the more they argue and push him, the more entrenched he's going to become in his opinions. Instead, I encourage them to explore each other's beliefs about the various issues they disagree on. And at the end of the session, after he walked out of my office, the mom turned to me and she said how grateful she was about the time we had spent. And she explained that this was the first hour she had actually sat with her son and civilly had a conversation for years. Children and teenagers are incredible sensors of hypocrisy. If they see parents abusing alcohol or marijuana, spending money recklessly, or living in any manner that is divergent from what they preach, they will mistrust their parents and not open up. Secrecy and withdrawal prime them for addiction. I remember as a child coming back into shul for Musaf, walking to my dad's seat, walking through the back of the shul, and I could smell the alcohol from some of the people who had been to the Kiddush Club. The community's decision to curtail such drinking in shuls has most definitely prevented addiction. Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting either that we should go back to the days of prohibition. I enjoy an occasional drink, and Purim is a very festive time for me. But I'm wary about, but being wary about our own use, especially making sure it doesn't get out of hand around children, is important. Many of my clients describe their career drinking beginning in shuls before they were bar mitzvah. In other cases, parents drag their clients into my office And the kid says to me, but my dad or the other guys in shul are getting drunk every Shabbos. Why shouldn't I get to drink? The prerequisite for getting help for addiction begins at home with the family. Minimization and denial, which have been the hallmarks of our approach in the past, must be avoided at all costs. I often tell people who are seeking help for a loved one, first you get into treatment for a couple months, then we can begin working with your significant other. If the family is not fully committed to addressing the problems they face, it is unlikely that they will be able to get the help for their child, spouse, or parent. I've rarely seen someone get sober without a supportive family system. The best treatment facilities in this country are those that have strong family programs in place. Families that just ship their child off are often doing a disservice and prolonging the issue. Often, when a loved one seeks treatment for the addict, they've gone through years of upheaval. Families can feel hijacked by the addiction. There could be undercurrents of anger, resentment, hurt, pain, going both ways. Properly addressing these feelings is crucial if the family system wants to get healthier. Too often people return from treatment to find their loved ones are still angry, spiteful, and resentful. Now that the addict isn't using, they're no longer walking on eggshells and unleash these feelings, leading to further pain and trauma. Al-Anon, the sister program to AA, is a free, self-supported group, self-led support group for significant others. There are weekly meetings that take place here in Teaneck, in Fairlawn, in Englewood, and all the neighboring communities. A person with these struggles cannot be forced, manipulated, bribed, exiled, or even loved into recovery. What we can often do is get help for ourselves, which will lead, possibly, hopefully, to change in them. Families are like seesaws. When one side moves, the other side is forced to move. When the significant other changes the way they operate, their loved ones will often be cajoled into changing themselves. I once heard a story. I was in YU and Rabbi Twersky came to speak about addiction, and he told this story about a family that came to him because their son had a gambling problem. And he simply told them, he said, go to a Gam-Anon meeting. It's a support group for family members of gamblers. But they didn't heed his advice, and he promised he would stop gambling if only they paid off his debt. So they paid off his debt. And true as formed, the family was back by Rabbi Twersky a couple years later and said, what do we do? And he said, go to a Gam-Anon meeting. But, there's a stigma around that. People might see us. So they again paid off his credit card bills because of the promises. And they ended up by Rabbi Twersky a couple years later. And again he said, go to a Gam-Anon meeting, but instead the parents and the siblings mortgaged their houses to the tune of $500,000 to bail out their son. When dealing with an addiction, we may want to sweep things under the rug. Other times, we may just want to send the person off to rehab, have them rehabilitated, dropped off at our doorstep like an Amazon Prime package, and all is good. However, we really need to resist this impulse and delve into the problem. At times, trying to push the addict into treatment is difficult. Using the seesaw approach, I found it helpful for the loved ones to make a statement like, I'm seeking help for myself, going to therapy or groups. You can join me when you're ready. For treatment to be successful, one needs to fundamentally change the way they live. It's not about getting abstinent or stopping using. It's about really living a sober lifestyle. If the individual just stops the addictive use but keeps everything else in their environment the same, they most likely will relapse. Changes should occur in every sphere of one's life, whether that's physical, emotional, or mental health, or spiritual or social well-being. I've seen countless clients who've gone from using drugs to a food problem, followed by a shopping or relationship addiction. It becomes like a game of whack-a-mole. I'll outline some of the various treatment options. There are different levels of care depending on the severity of the issue. Generally, the lowest level of care would be self-help groups like Alcoholics Anonymous. Countless studies have proven the efficacy of this simple 12-step based approach that has helped millions recover from their addiction. Meetings can be found anywhere one travels, or even here in Teaneck. Today in the morning did a Google search, just typed in AA meetings Teaneck, and I found 106 meetings that happen every week within 5 miles of here. Recently, one of my clients was on a cruise, and he told me, what am I going to do? All they do on cruises is drinking. And I said, listen, look for the AA meeting on the cruise. And true as form, he was at an AA meeting every single day on the cruise. While on vacation in Mexico, a client of mine went to the concierge in his hotel and said, "Where is the closest AA meeting?" And the concierge told him, recommended a meeting in the hotel, an English-speaking meeting in the hotel that took place every week. He was so grateful to have that support while on vacation. Other people need more of an intervention, at which point an addiction therapist would be recommended. But sometimes they need more structure than that, and they maybe need group therapy or drug screenings, and this can be found in an outpatient where the person attends multiple times a week and includes individual and group work, as well as psychiatry and medication management. Speaking about medication, medications can often be really helpful in treating an addiction, whether it's to help decrease the urges and cravings, or to address underlying mental health issues, or in the case of opiates, some people end up long-term on medication to prevent relapses on opiates. Sometimes, depending on the drug of choice, an individual may need to go to a medical detox for a few days to safely withdraw from their drug of choice. It could be extremely difficult or even deadly to do otherwise. This is especially the case for heavy drinking or anti-anxiety medication use or opiate use. At times, especially if the case is extreme and all other options have failed, inpatient treatment is the way to go, ranging from a few weeks to 6 months. These programs include intense group therapy, individual and trauma work, as well as other holistic approaches that have been proven to facilitate change. Sometimes people slowly step down following inpatient, and instead of coming straight home, step down to a sober living program before returning to their communities. It is vital to create a thorough discharge plan that includes contingencies for relapse. Often people relapse in their journey towards getting better. Although we don't promote it, it's important to recognize that many people will relapse, and the way we react to those relapses can make all the difference. And since mental illness often comes along with an addiction or may lead to an addiction, making sure that it is properly addressed through therapeutic and medical interventions is vital. This may mean seeking support of a therapist and psychiatrist. Substance abuse and addiction can be devastating and an even deadly disease. However, it is both preventable and treatable. Communities that rally around supporting recovery increase the chances for success. I hope that tonight's event could be a big step forward in addressing this problem. Thank you.